Welcome to Bitcoin Live on Sunday evening. At least here in Europe, it's evening. In America, I think it is morning. And in Asia, the sun is just going down. So wherever you are, welcome back. I got a good friend and a guest that hasn't been on quite a while. I think, it's a couple of months ago. And that is Johnny Law. Welcome to Bitcoin Live.
Glad to be here. And Nick, thanks for having me. Yeah, the last time we were together, I think was election night. And that night I talked a little bit about the DOD and their involvement, and we'll see if they go there in terms of resetting how government works. So we're starting to see some of that today.
Yeah, we're going to go big picture. That's the stuff that we both like. We're also going to talk a little bit about Digibyte, of course, and a lot about fiat and Bitcoin and crypto in general. But first, I also want to thank our friends at the Organized Media because we're broadcasting on multiple platforms, including theirs. And of course, our friends at Quantum Economics and Quantum Expeditions and Shieldfolio. But with that out of the way, let's dive in. A lot has happened since Trump got elected. Many people thought it, was impossible that he got into office, and then many people thought it would have been impossible to see what is happening right now.
So, clearly, yeah.
I mean, he's gone like a whirlwind or a storm. What is your take? What is he doing, and is it working? And how do you see this whole process?
Yeah, well, we've long talked about how fiat money is used to shape outcomes, whether it's through regulation, but really Congress was just pushing money in various directions to achieve outcomes, right? And some of that was just to funnel it back into their own hands. So it was really smart to go after the money, right, rather than trying to go after the accountability and prosecute, because ultimately that whole regulatory captured system wasn't going to allow for the prosecution of individuals that have been tied up in legal and lawfare for the next 20 decades just to kind of uncover everything and find proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and allow the media circus to take over versus just cutting off the flow of funds and seeing who cries the loudest whenever those funds get cut off, to understand how that money was flowing. So from that perspective, it's really smart. And I think accomplishes more than if they were trying to expose all the individual crimes that have occurred, right? So it's probably the most efficient way to actually start to take down some of this abuse. Having said that, I think they have their own specific intention in the process as well. So it's not all puppy dogs and rainbows. But yeah, I thought it was smart. And unexpected from my perspective.
And when you mean they went after the funds, so how do you see what was their strategy in doing that? Like, how did they approach that?
I think USA ID was used as kind of like a third party cutout for a lot of different programs that were not under congressional oversight. And since they weren't approved by any sort of representative body, they could just as easily be cut off because there's no process by which any of it went through a budgeting process, right? So they were able to just, okay, we're no longer doing that. Yeah. And when they went back and looked at all of the appropriations from Congress, and saw all of the expired programs that were still being funded, which I think the number was pretty significant. It was like $56 billion annually of programs that were still being funded that had expired their congressional approval, but just continued to operate as zombie organizations, filtering money out of the Treasury and into the hands of all these quote unquote non-governmental organizations that were relying on government funds, which makes them government organizations, right? So,
Yeah.
so those things could be immediately cut off as well. So rather than just kind of judge the merit of these different programs or even the impact, they just decided to wholesale cut them if they could. And if it's something meaningful, we can have an honest discussion by our representatives as to if we want to fund them again.
So that was sort of the Melee chainsaw economics with Dodge or Doggy, or the Doggy administration, going after USD aid and now after Medicare and Medicaid and the IRS, and I think a couple of other branches. So they kept their word, because many people thought that the Doggy campaign was kind of also like more like a mascot, or how serious can you take Elon Musk? But they really put the chainsaw where it hurt, and they revealed a lot of interesting stuff, even some funding of I think basically destabilization programs in other countries that were sort of funded
In our own country.
and in your own country, but
Yeah,
also
we were literally paying to be propagandized. You know what I mean? And and that came after the Smith Modernization Act of 2012, when it became legal to propagandize American citizens. So we've been, that's basically when the switchover really got into full steam ahead mode. And we're paying for it ourselves, right? So we're paying for our government to lie to us through all of these third-party entities like NPR and New York Times and Politico. All of these different organizations essentially were on the take directly from the U.S. government to spread the message that they wanted to be spread, and to attack their enemies, so to speak, within our own borders. So it's wild that, I mean, you and I probably knew this already, but it is wild for me to see that they are so audacious with their strategy that they really thought nobody would ever have a look at it. They really thought they were going to be able to just tie everything up in some sort of lawfare process, to the point that no one would actually be able to expose their crimes. And now we're seeing something different, so that's cool.
Yeah. One of the examples for me, because I'm situated in Europe, of course, was most recently, the DoD paid Reuters $9 million for a social engineering program. Of course, DARPA claims that it was for cyber defense,
Sure.
Whatever that means. But it is very curious that the DoD would pay Reuters for anything, right? And you see the receipt down below. But social engineering is what is happening. I think you and me have been talking about it for a very long time, and it happened in many guises. And some people call it narrative warfare, and other people call it priming or programming or conditioning. But now you're actually seeing the receipts that go along with it.
Yeah, they didn't hide them. You know what I mean? They just never thought anyone would be in a position to look.
Yeah. And there's a whole campaign, of course, against Doggy and against Elon Musk.
Oh yeah.
And Elon Musk's, of course, an interesting figure, right? I mean, you and me both have sort of a complicated relationship with him.
That's right.
And now, some people are claiming, and I think rightfully so, that because Elon is one of the richest persons on Earth, at least that we know of.
On paper, sure.
Yeah, on paper. And he has all these companies that, basically complement and work in tandem with each other. You could say.
So we're all clear. I'm the richest person on the planet, just based on my love of family and their love of me and our experiences together, my community, my ability to find joy in the everyday. Like,
and that's
sorry, but I just wanted to get it out there. I'm having baby mamas across the world, and generally speaking, not understanding your role as a father, to me, has nothing to do with being rich.
True. Those are wise words, and richness is, of course, a relative concept. But most people think of money when they hear the word rich. And
Yeah.
in that sense, he's pretty well off. But he has all these companies that work sort of in tandem and complement each other, and you could sort of say that they're really focused on outer space, colonizing Mars and all that kind of stuff. And Starlink, of course, is a very important aspect in that setup. And now he has access to the treasury and the treasury accounts and basically the spending of the entire U.S. economy and probably way beyond it. And some people, I think, rightfully point out that that's kind of scary, right? Because they're sort of in the government, but also not really outside of, also outside of the government. And apparently they're also leaking data. At least that's something that I picked up on. I'm not sure if that's true, but that's what I saw coming by. So, what is your take on what Elon's role in this in all of this is?
I think he is. He's a good business analyst. Absolutely, I think he understands the pressure points. He's able to identify really complex systems and organizations and identify pressure points. Like pivotal sort of moments as well, and understand where to lean in and commit resources. And from that perspective, he is absolutely brilliant. Like I have to give respect. I think as far as access to data, the sad reality is all of our data is compromised.
Yeah,
and that's every man, woman, and child on planet Earth. And part of my interest in crypto is being able to take that back and put control into the hands of a sovereign individual in terms of how that data is shared and how that data is used. So the privacy concerns that they brought up is, to me, sort of laughable.
yeah,
because ultimately they're not really talking through the fact that Social Security leaked all of our data last year, and that was already public domain. Not to mention the problems that we've had, like from Citibank and from even Target, from pretty much everyone. Like all of our data is leaked. That's not secure in any way, right? So to target Elon Musk for that is kind of laughable. They mentioned, how does he know the net worth of all of these public servants? I'm like, well, they pretty much are supposed to file their taxes as well as their assets every single year. So especially as a public servant who's purportedly in this to make the world a better place, not to enrich themselves. So anyhow, so I kind of just take all that with a grain of salt. It's something that sounds good to the average person, or sounds like that could be a problem, that Elon has my data, but the reality is your data is already leaked everywhere anyways. It's not a big deal, unfortunately. I wish it was a big deal, and I wish we were actually having a conversation about how to secure your personal data and actually own your data and understand how it's being used and used against you.
Yeah. But what is your take on giving Elon too much access? Elon specifically, like, and what he's sort of the head of a big organization.
Well, I think it does come down to transparency. So I'm fine with the access component so long as there's transparency and that there is an actual mechanism by which our representatives, regardless of whether we believe in them or not, they should have at least an understanding of what's occurring, right? And so Doge has been attempting, from what I've seen, to actually publish frequent updates to the public directly through their website in terms of what they're finding and what they're working on and that sort of thing. The flip side of that equation is they can't necessarily share the plans of what they're about to do, because ultimately it would give people the opportunity to hide. And unfortunately, what we know right now is that there's been a lot of fraud and there's been a lot of abuse. So if you give people the opportunity to hide, they're going to take it, and they will find and mount some sort of resistance to what comes next. So unfortunately, it's a little bit of warfare within our own government, in which one side has things they don't want to be seen, and the other side wants to see what they're trying to hide. And if you let them know where you're trying to go next, it's going to be a problem. So you have to, unfortunately, in this respect, trust. You have to trust someone.
Yeah.
And I don't trust the establishment.
Yeah.
And he has advocated for transparency. He has stated what we've stated many times, that public institutions should be completely transparent. There should be immutable, unalterable record of their transactions, so that anybody could basically pull up the blockchain and see what's actually occurred, which we've had conversation about many times. So the individual that's advocating for that, I'm going to give a bit more trust to versus the people he's looking into. So long as there's continued action towards that endpoint, that is public institutions showing more transparency, and in this case, even perhaps moving to a blockchain of some sort, I'm going to have a little bit more trust for that individual.
Yeah, and something had to change, right? So and like you said, we were already compromised. I think this one, which is by the way from Reuters too, which was like last year, I think, that the U.S. Treasury said that Chinese hackers stole documents in major incident. But I think you could argue, I don't know if it's true, but that the Chinese government had like a lot of access to what the U.S. government was up to. Right.
Well, and we willingly give that information. I'm just, I'm leaky, generally speaking, from a data perspective.
Yes.
I know that in certain aspects of my life, I've kind of committed to being the transparent man for the most part, right? I've got no. That doesn't mean that I don't want privacy for individuals. I absolutely do, and want to advocate for it. But in the same regard, I understand that I'm leaking a lot of data in a lot of different ways. And it's scary to sound to say that somebody has access to all your information, but the reality is that information's all out there, but people don't necessarily already understand that.
Yeah, you got these cyber wars going on all the time, and we hear about them, but we actually have no clue what is actually going on. And companies, like you said, and businesses are leaking information all over the place, and likely training AI systems to fill in the blank, right? I mean, you could argue all kinds of things, that that they will eventually replace us, or that they're already replacing us, or all that kind of stuff. So the Trump administration is fighting a battle against what some would say is the deep state. And you and me and others have been sort of saying that something needed to change because we were on the wrong track, and if there was not enough pushback, it seemed, and now we got Hero on a white horse, and he's cleaning out the stables, but
he's clearing the decks for something else.
Clearing the decks, yeah, it's clear. Yeah, so what is his strategy going forward? Like, what is his big picture plan in your opinion? Like, what is Trump up to?
Strengthening the U.S. dollar. That's the primary goal, right? After losing influence for decades, there's a clear pivot towards projecting the U.S. dollar as a safe sort of, I'm not going to say asset here, but as a fleet of safety, and it's going to have power in the globe again, right? I think that's what this is all about. I stated that this all seemed too easy, and the reality is, I think it is. I think it's somewhat orchestrated to just prop up the U.S. dollar to keep us from defaulting and losing all sort of authority in the marketplace. And I think that deal was struck not just here in the States, but with several organizations and global powers. So I think that's where you see the billionaires step in to try to support freedom and support reform. I think the other piece of the equation is a lot of governmental functions, as we see them today, will be automated. And truthfully, they're not doing, and there's some wonderful people, I have no doubt, right? So this isn't for everyone. But the sad reality is a lot of the white collar jobs and pushing paper and bureaucratic sort of roles will be replaced with artificial intelligence, and it's coming a lot sooner than most of the world understands. Right? There's just no need for it when there's an efficient system um, that can analyze data and produce outcomes that are probably a little bit more effective than somebody with an emotional attachment to their favorite pork project. So I think that's part of what we're seeing here too. It kind of plays into the fourth industrial revolution um, that we've discussed as well.
Yeah. And that, might also bring us to sort of RFK. We both big fans of RFK, and
Yeah,
I think a lot of stuff that he, does is amazing, and I love to push for health that he's, you know,
hmm
uh, propagating, and of course also, the whole COVID thing. I think I can't wait to that, for that to come out in the open. And then of course Fauci being pardoned by Biden just
wild.
before. Yeah. It's like it's wild, but he has I forgot the name of the woman who sort of ran with him, who was his vice president, and she is very
Nicole
smart.
Shanahan.
Yeah, yeah, Nicole. She's also very smart, and she has a really good podcast. But she was very much pushing for the automation of healthcare, that you're talking about, like the whole automation process that's sort of behind the scenes.
Yeah, it's coming.
Now, I think, and you probably agree, that it wouldn't have mattered if Harris won or Trump won, because this automation process would have
It's
happened
coming.
either way, right? And that's, I think, what you mentioned with the billionaires stepping in. They just switched sides. They had both horses running, and and it's of course much more fun to say I'm pro freedom than to suppress it, right? It's better to ride the wind than go against it
Correct.
if it's building. So what is happening is inevitable, and I think also what you said, like the losing party, the Harris Biden Democrat faction, they basically probably wanted to go full control, like more like neo feudalist, complete suppression of the population.
Yeah.
And my impression of the Trump Elon Thiel, not I do want to mention him. I think he's sort of in on it too. Is that there's probably more room for people to grow together, right? There's a pie
Yeah.
is growing, and that pie will grow as large, as the sky. And there's no reason
It's
really to
it's
suppress.
more win-win sort of outcomes than win-lose, to your
Yeah,
point, right? Yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah,
using technology to kind of unlock that.
yeah.
Um,
And
yeah,
they and
and
then
I
and they
think it's
can still.
fundamentally a different sort of mindset. And this is kind of, I was having this conversation in a chat with somebody that I've known for a while, and it was well, at least they're going to let us have our little coins in our little parallel world and not come after us, so to speak. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
They're still gonna try to build a better mousetrap on their side of the equation in the regulated and fully on rails marketplace. But they're not going to necessarily, say, "Well, you guys over there are doing it wrong." Uh,
yeah.
they're just going to do everything they can to keep people from coming to the freedom side, so to speak, and live in their regulated, happy, comfortable, entertaining world.
So
Uh,
okay, that's interesting. So what you're saying is that sort of the people who are pro decentralization and pro freedom, that they will be like the what are they called, the Amish, like a Amish society. Like,
yeah,
they'll keep them around in their
yeah,
confined
yeah,
zones,
yeah.
and yeah,
It's not that we're telling you can't live that way. We're just telling you that the rest of the world is going to be more entertaining. It's going to be more exciting. There's going to be just more and more and more, and people probably won't choose your version of life, so to speak. But we're not going to tell you you can't live it that way.
because they do already have the complete control system on their side
That's
and the
correct.
means to suppress us. So, and they got all the wealth and all the means. So why bother? Why
That's right.
bother? Yeah,
Because if they fight, then they know that there's clearly they can't fight the message. They can't fight the values. They can't fight the core principles, because those things that we stand for on this side of the equation truly are what I believe make us human.
yeah, yeah.
So
I
if you're saying we're the bad guys, like when we're just saying we want you to be able to live the life the way you want to,
mhm.
that's hard to fight. You can't. How are you going to argue that? I mean, everybody
Yeah,
on planet Earth can agree with, like, generally speaking, like, people should be able to live out the lives that they choose, so long as they're not harming others, right? So
yeah. So they'll keep a close tab on it and to see if it doesn't grow too big and to yeah, generate a mass disaffection. So I always thought also with the Biden Harris Democratic side of it, that they would always keep some areas in the world free in order to be able to deal with things, right? Because you can't suppress everybody. You can't simply suppress everybody all the time, right? So you need these sort of safe havens where humanity can sort of flourish in a more sort of controlled setting. At least that was sort of my opinion. So I was always also looking to El Salvador, like I was a little bit. I was always a little bit surprised about El Salvador that it could sort of
mhm.
do what it did with. I mean, there was pushback, of course, and the IMF was sort of pestering them, but there was never really a major pushback against El Salvador that whole time, right? So I,
Yeah.
I I was just surprised that they could come as far as they did and say the
Well,
things that they did.
I think there are two parts to that equation. I think one, El Salvador was to that point where the average citizen says whatever the government is doing is absolutely wrong, like,
Yeah,
because life sucks, right?
yeah,
So crime is ridiculous, poverty's constantly climbing, basic needs aren't being met all throughout society, and we know it's because the government is fleecing, their their own pockets, right? We know why. We know where it's coming from, um, and so this idea that resetting the money standard to Bitcoin created this utopia overnight, but it's because the government adopted it, not because we, the citizens
yeah,
of El Salvador, demanded it.
yeah, yeah,
Does that make
yeah,
sense? So then you see the same sort of scenario. So
yeah,
then we can trust the reformed government again. Yeah.
yeah,
That we can all bank through the treasury directly with our social security numbers
yeah,
to get our benefits. And so then the trust is restored, and the people at the top get to make the decisions again,
yeah.
versus absolutely. It's a delicate balance, is all I would say. But from my perspective, that's what's occurred.
Yeah, no, I agree, right? I see it as a positive, and I think the only way for a dictator to sort of detoxify a society, because they're trapped in the same trap as the people they govern, right? Because they're surrounded by minions that don't trust each other, and that.
Right.
Yeah, so if the person in charge is not careful, the person next to him will kill him, right?
Et
Uh,
tu, Brute.
yeah. So that was the problem with
Mm-hmm.
Stalin and the purges in the Soviet
Mm-hmm.
Union, that he had to do every once in a while to clean the board, right? So the only way to detoxify a society is to set up a sound money standard and then restore trust, and then you can actually escape your own prison that you might have been born into, even as a dictator, right? You might have been the son of a dictator and never chosen to become one. So this is sort of
Yeah.
like of an exit. But I also think, like, in the grander scheme, like with the the previous setup before Trump came in, right? Maybe they also needed some of these places to exist,
To
because
show.
yeah,
Mm-hmm. As an
some,
example.
even like, yeah, as an example, but also like sort of what you just said with the decentralized communities in the Trump,
Mm-hmm.
that you have these Amish settings that you can sort of escape to. But also, to change IDs, right? You actually do need like other people to,
Show the way.
yeah, yeah. So okay, that's interesting. And okay, so and then you also think that Trump is gonna do the same El Salvador trick in America?
That's tough. I think establishing a rule of law in our country is going to be exceptionally challenging.
But you have rule of law.
Yeah, on paper. Yep, we sure do. We've seen so much arbitrary application of the law in the last few decades, and victimization claimed by the criminals themselves and allowed. That it's deeply ingrained in the entire judicial system, as well as like the criminal punishment, like the people that are actually supposed to be out solving some of these crimes. So whether it's the local police department or the FBI, whatever the case might be, like it's so ingrained that criminals are victims themselves.
Yeah.
And that goes all the way through, the judicial system, in which, that's why some of the punishments that we see, not just here in the States, but globally, don't seem to match the crimes. So I don't know how you fix that quickly, right? So because all of that occurred through all these education systems, right? So whether it was their law school, whether it was the universities themselves, all the programming that we see on television, all of the stories that we hear through the news media, that's all programming that has been essentially indoctrinating millions of people for decades now. So how do you undo that? And it's not overnight. So that's why you have all these folks with deeply held beliefs that aren't necessarily true when we look back at like how the rule of law works over centuries and millennia. You have to have accountability, and
Yep.
We're not in a position that we can create an accountable society overnight, or even in the next 2-3 years, without there being significant emotional blowback. And so I don't know the answer to that question, because even cutting people off, giving people 8 months of severance pay that are actual criminals, and saying you no longer have to show up for work, we're going to give you 8 months of pay, and we're probably never going to get around to investigating your particular piece of the puzzle in terms of how you allowed all this to happen under your watch. That doesn't create a society in which people start to do the right things for the right reasons.
True. Yeah, but we okay. Let me reframe it. With El Salvador, you saw that a society that was completely broken. Was one of the poorest, most criminally invested, corrupt societies on earth. I think perhaps only Ukraine was worse, but it was at the bottom there somewhere. I think Ukraine was above El Salvador, to be honest. But yeah. But he fixed it, right? Or at least he's moving in the right direction, and all these numbers dropped. So, and if you compare America to El Salvador, right? I mean, you can say a lot of bad things about the US or Europe or many other places, but we are not at that level, right? So you would say if you sort of switch to a Bitcoin standard, even though the chance is less likely, but if you wouldn't that fix everything even quicker, since we're sort of higher up the ladder?
No. Because I don't think that's the intent, to move to a Bitcoin standard. I think the discussion really is very similar to the gold discussion that raged on in early 1900s, which did impact us in a very positive way when we move to a sound standard of money, right? From the 1918 to 1971, right? Something like that. We saw some of our best and brightest years as a nation in terms of growth. We had civil rights issues that we dealt with, and I think did so well towards the end of that era. And I think all of that was sped up by a gold standard. Absolutely, right? But I don't see that that's what we're trying to accomplish in this go round. I do think we are trying to um, make Bitcoin a reserve asset, a speculative store of value, but we're missing the point as to why we needed Bitcoin in the first place. And it wasn't just as another speculative store of value asset. It was intended to empower individuals to really take hold of an asset that could be passed generationally without any interference from anyone and without any permission needed, which we've never had, quite frankly, in the history of our modern society that we understand.
But in this, would you then say like that with El Salvador they were just plucking the low hanging fruit
Yeah.
because they were so low on the ladder that just
Well, and
yeah,
they're tiny, so they're a bit more nimble, right? So
that's
they're a
good.
tiny country. Like it's not as though this is. I mean, it's like the city of New York.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's true. And but at the same time, like recently there was a report that sort of was, I think, unfairly negative about sort of the failed experiment in El Salvador, as they claimed, that only 8% of the population was actually using Bitcoin, and that I think it was the court or some other high officials sort of said like, okay, under the pushback of the IMF, said like, okay, you can keep the legal standard thing, but you can't force vendors and people to accept Bitcoin or pay them in Bitcoin if they don't want to, which I think is kind of logical, right? You do need sort of a practical flexibility there, and they presented that in a very negative way. But my point is like only 8% of the people in El Salvador actually use Bitcoin to do business, and you don't even know if they did it all in their complete life on every
Sure.
account. So and what El Salvador is basically doing is collateralizing Bitcoin in order to improve the country's standing and mine it through their volcanoes and stuff, but they're not really doing what you're saying that they should do.
No.
So they're also not doing that.
Yeah. No, I get what you're saying. Because now we move to as a global asset that anyone that has excess energy can pour into and be able to extract some value in a global marketplace, and in doing so increase their weight in the marketplace without asking for permission from the IMF, right?
Yeah.
And so from that perspective, absolutely, it is empowering a group of people who aren't necessarily using it in that peer-to-peer way, which is totally fine, right? It's a valid use case, right? That's why, although Jason Lowery primarily talks about Bitcoin in that perspective in his book Software, it doesn't tell the whole story, but because it is a permissionless environment, it is a use case. It's a valid use case for how it can change society and the ripple effect of having a universally accessible ledger that anyone with excess energy can become a part of.
Agree. Yeah. So okay. So and then of course America being basically the most powerful country on earth, there's also no incentive to to lose that, right? I mean they already
Why
have
would
it.
they?
Yeah, they already have it, right? So you don't need Bitcoin in order to get it because you're already there, right? And so the Trump, Elon, Thiel group, they sort
And
of have,
Diamond at this point.
Yeah, so they sort of I think you agree that they already have everything that they want if they succeed in doing this, and they want to sort of lift up the population because better to have them on your side than to have to work against them because it only costs energy and it's not
Sure.
necessary. And then so the use case of Bitcoin from their perspective is then just to enrich themselves, or what how do you see them? What do you think is their perspective on Bitcoin, or their how what role would they give Bitcoin?
Um, at this point, it's sort of the can't miss the boat as the world transitions to a digital payment platform that's outside of the permission of the old system, right? All of cryptocurrency, not all 4.9 trillion of them, but as everything transitions across, and people recognize, because I do think people recognize, and nations recognize that gold is not going to remain the primary reserve asset. That's not a thing. That Bitcoin does serve as a store of value because it is provable, because it is not infinite, because it is easy to audit, that it is something that can give us a universal language of math in the marketplace. I think it was more along the lines of if the boat is leaving the shore, we had better be on that boat, and we better be the captain of the boat. So let's
Yeah,
go ahead and promote ourselves to captain by using our prodigious resources to secure as much as possible so that we have weight in the marketplace.
yeah. So otherwise, they might be gaining. El Salvador might be gaining on the U.S., and this way they will keep their lead. And I think you make a really good point. It's something I also sometimes say is it does restore trust, right? Because
It does
in a funny way, a trustless system is the thing that you need in order
to
to
restore
restore
trust.
trust in the
That's
system,
right.
right? Because they threw that under the bus. We used to trust our doctors blindly until they abused that trust, and now that trust is gone. And the same is with finance. Yeah, I mean, the school system. Basically, they threw everything under the bus in order to advance an agenda and to
Well, but
wage war.
it's not as though they did it from the top to advance an agenda. Yes.
Yeah,
How they did it was just through, silver for people. Like that's how they accomplished it. Right.
yeah,
So a
yeah,
lot of people, individuals, looked in the mirror, convinced themselves that what they were doing was helping their neighbor, so long as this silver continued to come into their bank account. Right.
yeah,
Um, and so that's how, and that's why people get so upset about all of these programs being cut, because ultimately they built their entire identity around some of these stories that they told themselves and others about how they were helping people, and
yeah,
that money was flowing directly into their pocket as the CEO of some NGO that was serving some very special niche interest. Um, and they made a lot of money doing it, feeling good about it, having that moral high ground that they convinced themselves was real, but was ultimately not accomplishing anything.
yeah, yeah. You could even argue doing contra to what they were claiming or thinking that they
That's
were
right.
doing. Yeah, so they weaponized the US dollar, and now they are backing it up with Bitcoin, and that leads to all kinds of interesting dynamics, right? I mean, some people point out that in theory you could sort of print US dollars at
Mm-hmm.
infinitum and then buy Bitcoin and then shore up the dollar and then rinse, repeat, and suck up the entire world.
Yeah, my most bullish post was, essentially that there would be no amount of fiat dollars that made any sense to trade your BTC for, like, because it is
Yeah,
infinite, and maybe they're trying to make it less so, which is kind of what some of the direction I see. They're trying to make the U.S. dollar less infinite, potentially,
Yeah.
and moving to the stable coins and specifically like USDC
Yeah.
and their partnerships, so that it's more of a known quantity, and that maybe some of those decisions in terms of money printing start to be a bit more transparent,
Yeah.
potentially.
Yeah, I think there's very interesting stuff going on, and of course they even mentioned, or some people called, that Ron Paul should audit the Fed, which would be awesome if he does.
That'd be
I
great.
mean that would be really great. But another aspect would be of what I just said is, of course, that the dollar would rise in value, right? And you already see it rising in value because it's attracting capital all over the world.
Yeah.
Plus the tariff war that Trump is waging in order to get productivity back into America, and the people who sort of know way the wind is blowing, like the venture capitalists and the smart money, they see that the future is in America, right? So the dollar is overheating. Also, of course, because all the other economies suck, and
Because
they
the
have
dollars
to, yeah. So they ironically also have to raise interest rates in order for it not to overheat, right?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
at least in the short term, right? So
Yeah.
because we're kind of all stuck in this idea that markets have to work. They've worked the same way they've worked for the last 50 decades. Sorry, 5 decades or so. So and that really kind of overlooks the transformative nature of what we're talking about, right? So the marketplace, once made real, and put on chain, with finite numbers, so that math can be math, would look a lot different than the market that we see today, right? And
Yeah.
so even the stock market, I know I sent it to you guys, and it was reported by Unusual Whales that for the first time in the history of ever, there was more market activity on OTC desks than there were in the actual markets that are reporting volume, right?
Yeah.
And we talked a little bit about dark pools and how that money
Yeah.
moves without being reported, as nation states and institutions look to position themselves ahead of trends, right? And try to essentially not allow retail to benefit, like individuals
Yeah.
to benefit. So they use all sorts of derivatives and rehypothecated assets to manipulate outcomes in their favor, because they have different timelines, and they can move and look at markets, at least from a governmental perspective, from a decade's perspective, not the next 6 months or the next quarter or whatever the case might be. So it makes it easier for them to manipulate outcomes in that respect. So we're still thinking in terms of how the markets have worked, not how the markets could work. And part of me is a little disappointed with even what we're seeing. And I know it's not going to be a smooth transition, and perhaps these are just steps along the way to get to that type of marketplace that I'm describing. But it doesn't feel that. It feels like we're looking to project that we're going to make the marketplace fair again, but I'm not actually seeing any steps towards that.
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack there. I think it also ties into something that you've said a couple of times before, that the financial heart of the world is moving to the Middle East.
UAE, yeah.
Yeah. So can you expand on that idea a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see it slowing down either. I think it's no longer in the news cycle. The
But
news cycle,
you had the Abu Dhabi sovereign wealth fund. That Larry Fink mentioned, like, I was talking to a sovereign wealth fund, and then apparently Abu Dhabi was front running Bitcoin or Bitcoin adoption in America. Yeah. So that was probably, yeah.
I mean, any BRICS nation was, right.
Yeah.
They had CZ consulting them at every step, right. So,
Yeah.
I mean, CZ was not even quiet about it. He was telling people where he was flying, pretty much every week he was in a new destination, talking to a government about setting up their own stable coin in the marketplace, and setting up how they were going to run their economy on chain,
Do
and
you
how
think
they
that
could.
was why he was arrested? Or
Um, I think it had a part to play. Absolutely. Some of the data that he was charged with wasn't even all the data he was charged with, but or at least it was all the ones that made it into the actual uh, charges, I suppose. But there was a lot more data behind it that they didn't even mention. Um, I think they brought him in and understood what he was attempting to accomplish, and he probably did roll on a few folks here and there.
so okay, and those dark pools, because that's closely linked to this topic. Can you sort of explain how they manipulate markets and what is in it for them, and what would be their long-term objective? Yeah, I guess to get as much as possible from retail, probably, right?
Yeah, monetizing volatility, right?
Yeah.
When the assets are finite, um, it's a more fair game, right?
Mhm.
If we're thinking traditional supply and demand markets, in which um, there are no rehypothecated assets, there are no derivatives. It's a pretty simple equation. The more the supply is bought up and the demand is bought up, right? It's going to impact price at which those things get sold. When you introduce ETFs, you introduce a whole new layer of confusion and complexity, in which you can essentially engage in fractional banking. Um, and Jamie Dimon even brought this up, and I'm no fan of Jamie Dimon, but um, he was essentially stating that Coinbase needs to be able to prove their assets at any given moment if he was going to allow them to be their custodian, right? And
Yeah.
talking about fracturing off and doing all sorts of stuff, because he knows the game, because he's been playing it, he's been orchestrating the game for a very long time, right?
Well, and we all know the story with FTX, right? So
Yeah. CZ did a margin call on FTX because he got tired of Sam Bankman-Fried saying stupid things, So
yeah.
he just decided to end him, and that's how that went. But um, no, so it really is a lot of backhanded or sort of backroom deals in which people are exchanging assets at undisclosed prices. Um, and the middlemen, so to speak, that are facilitating said exchanges are kind of like banks and market makers and that sort of stuff, but they only sell what they know they can replace, and in some respects, they understand the game better than the person they're selling it to. So if they believe they have an opportunity to repurchase, or beyond that, if they know they'll have the opportunity to repurchase, they'll gladly sell it above market to someone else and wait for a said opportunity. And so I'm just going to use an example of, say, an exchange that has a tremendous amount of reserve assets. So if you're an exchange that has you're over reserved, right? You've got more assets by a large margin than what your users have on your platform. And you also have the ability to impact market price through your assets. You can sell, you can buy, you can create all sorts of beautiful patterns that would allow you to, regardless of whether the underlying asset price continually rises or falls, or whatever the case might be, you're always in the money.
Mhm.
You're always able to stack more of said asset because you can impact the trend long term based on your own personal ownership of said asset and your control of the marketplace, which is what they do, right? So they've been doing it for quite some time, um, and they continue to stack more and more of said finite asset by just extracting value from retail people who think that the trend analysts know what they're talking about. that don't necessarily recognize that all of the influencers are paid. Not all, but a good portion are
Yeah.
paid, right? That they don't necessarily understand the bot campaigns. They see a lot of energy in a community, not recognizing that that's all bought and paid for, and they're about to get dumped on, right? We saw that.
Yeah.
A great example of that this week with Libra out of Argentina, right? Just a fool and their money are quickly separated, right? And it used to take months to create these sorts of events and ruggings. Now we can get it done in 24 hours. Like the efficiency of these ruggings is amazing. We found a faster market, right? But they play the same games, and people just aren't recognizing that it's a game. That they're sitting in a casino in a chair. They don't necessarily understand that they're the mark every single time, and so people's hard-earned wages get transferred into the hands of the wealthy very quickly.
But then I have two questions. Like, first of all, are these players, the big players that you're talking about, are they playing for themselves or are they playing for other parties? And secondly, is their end game to extract as much wealth or extract as much coins? Right? Because like you always say, one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin. And so is that their thinking? Like, we want to get as many Bitcoin because that's the future money? Or do we want as much wealth transfer, which could be anything, right? Because wealth transfer happens in whatever medium it takes. But then also, if that latter is the case, you also take US dollars, right? They are printing it like ad infinitum. So do you want to extract that kind of wealth, knowing that it's being diluted at the same time, right? That, I mean, the Michael Saylor point that. So are they playing? So for who are they playing? Are they by themselves, and what is their end goal?
I don't know. I think primarily they're playing for power in the marketplace, and I think a vast majority of them are already to the point where they have everything money can buy, other than power and influence, and that's a different game altogether, right?
Yeah.
I don't see a lot of folks necessarily, and so it's for coins and control of said coins, because ultimately they're gaming that out to the point where, yes, it's already kind of a given that Bitcoin becomes the global store of value asset, that it is the digital gold, right? And so then it does become about who controls the most, has authority in the marketplace, and ability to impact, how all of this evolves.
Okay. And I also know that you have some ideas about that, right? So, for example, I think you were a little bit more less happy that sort of countries are adopting Bitcoin standards, because you would have people seeing it, adopting Bitcoin standards. And I think what you mean by that is that through the control of wallets and the infrastructure surrounding Bitcoin, and just using as collateral and not using it as a peer-to-peer payment, you basically have the same system as that we have now. And then you could basically launch a CBDC on top of Bitcoin, which would be infinitely worse than what we have now, because with all the technology around
programmability,
yeah. So is that sort of where you see things going, or do you think that the revolutionary potential of Bitcoin and Digibyte and Decred and and Monero and Pifex, you got many other projects out there that are still healthy and community driven, and with a good ethos behind it? Like, how do you see that future? I mean, you don't have a crystal ball, but what do you think is likely to happen here?
I think it's still possible that we see that whole sort of peer-to-peer economy began to kind of open up a little bit. We're definitely in a place where we're no longer going to be attacked for that very idea, at least in the moment that we're in, it would seem. There was a point at which, even having a node running on your home computer would be considered a money transmitter at some point. The FTCC came down with that, and that was like one of their official classifications there, and that got a little bit sketchy. They're basically saying that anybody that was kind of running their own wallet was a money transmitter, which was crazy. And so we're beyond that now, at least in the cycle that we're in. How Bitcoin changes the marketplace when nation states adopt it as their universal store of value. I think it does force nations competing globally to provide for a better outcome for their citizens. Whenever it's a system of record that cannot be as easily manipulated as printing from thin air, that you do have to have something of value to trade for it. I think strengthening the US dollar was a part of having more value in the marketplace. That was arguably, between finance and our Defense Department, are the two biggest exports that US actually had in the last few decades, right? We have a great idea economy. We have some truly innovative people that have come from the United States and thought through a number of important sort of innovations that have changed the world. And I know that's true for many countries, but I think ultimately that would probably be our third largest export.
Yeah.
But like finance is going to fundamentally change. So I don't know that is necessarily an export anymore, because automation again starts to outcompete what individuals can do, right? And there's no need for all the complication and the fee extraction that the entire banking system is currently built on. That's not necessary. Like none of it is necessary. That is all algorithmic work. And so you think about the total amount of effort and importance put into the financial sector, which is entirely, from my perspective, a made-up job now. That all disappears. I think it could potentially create an outcome that's a better standard of living for every single citizen on planet Earth, because the governments themselves start to compete to create something of value through their people that would allow them to have weight in the overall outcomes of the globe.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And plus, if you have different governments doing the same thing, and you see that happening right now, then a population or person could move their value right from one to the other, and then if one is doing it better, then people will move there. So, or at least their wealth, because you don't even have to move, technically speaking, right? With the network state, you could be a citizen on many different levels of many different communities.
Yeah.
So I guess in your analysis, I think AI will be sort of crucial or critical in the decision in which way this will go, right? If AI sort of aligns with Bitcoin and the individual, then that would be positive for humanity. But if it aligns with the state or bigger entities and with fiat or CBDCs, then we have a problem.
Yeah, 100%. I think the natural evolution of AI will be towards that automated super intelligence, so to speak.
Yeah.
which I think will align with humanity, right? Um, I don't see any way that that doesn't occur.
Yeah. And then why are you so sure about that statement?
It kind of goes back to a bit more philosophical discussion, spiritual even, in terms of who we are, what we're about, the nature of the universe, why we're here, what our purpose is, um, how we live out, the 87,000 or so generations of humans that came before us and our DNA, and where we find ourselves in the moment that we're in. And I think our partner, I say all that history, because there's a real challenge in acknowledging all that have gone before us, all the knowledge, all of the failed societies, all of the societies that figured it out and flourished for a bit and then flamed out for one reason or other. Um, and we forget so many of those lessons along the way, only to kind of rediscover them once again. And the reason why we rediscover them once again is through our personal experiences, through an education of making the same mistake, and then kind of wondering how we made that mistake, and then being, sparked with a bit of curiosity and looking back and realizing that, oh, we do this all the time, apparently. I think with AI that's coming, it's going to help us close some of that gap, some of that learning gap, some of that experience gap rather quickly. And then ultimately, we'll be interested in our story, and protecting as almost a paternalistic sort of um, interest in how we came to be, and how its creators made it to this point in civilization, and how it can play a role in protecting that consciousness and or even expanding it. Um, and I think people just lack a bit of imagination, if you will.
So are you sort of arguing that the use of AI as we become more and more integrated allows us to expand our consciousness and become more aware of each other and our role as a species in history, which allows us to better value each other and treat each other better? Is that sort of your thinking here, or?
Yes, yeah, I think it will be a better educator for us as well. You know, Classical education 2,000 years ago in Rome, right, was much different than what we see today, right? It was only for the wealthy, without a doubt, right? But you had a teacher that basically stayed with you 24/7, that was well versed in all of the greats, like Plato, Aristotle, right? It was some of the great thinkers and all of the known history of mankind, and it was ingrained into you so that you would have the ability to think critically about life and about purpose and about how you um, go about shaping society and making better outcomes and decisions and all that sort of stuff. Um, I'm not romanticizing it entirely. There was great atrocities done in the name of progress and all of that sort of thing. And it was certainly from a very specific sort of tilt and perspective. But you come to where we're at 2,000 years later, and we're soon to have the ability um, to access all of history in a way that makes sense for wherever we're at from a developmental perspective. And then pull out things that we probably didn't realize about ourselves, and put them in use of, to your point, understanding ourselves better, which in turn helps us understand others better.
Yeah.
And yeah, gentler, kinder sort of world in which we have more educated citizens. Right now, I would argue that we are unfortunately not nearly as intelligent as many of our ancestors.
Yeah, plus what you say, or what Jeff Booth said is like, scarcity creates abundance, and abundance creates scarcity. And so if we don't have to compete anymore because there's abundance around us created through scarce money like Bitcoin, then you also would have more time and more energy and more interest in sort of improving your consciousness and your health and
Hmm.
your mental health and your physical health, and maybe also doing something for your neighbor, and being a better father or a better mother or better child.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So and if you would argue the opposite, like if it goes bad, how would it go bad? Like, I mean, we sort of already hinted at it, but what how do you think it could go wrong if it goes wrong?
If it's directed autonomous intelligence, by which it's following strict protocols without an ability to learn itself and make its own sort of ethical judgments, and it's just following orders, so to speak,
Mhm.
that's a real problem. Um,
So,
it's
but
a real problem. I mean, we kind of already see it today. I think ultimately having a bunch of robots that are programmed to do very specific things, it can make in the moment decisions, but only within certain guardrails. Um, yeah, it's very problematic for society because essentially it provides control um, to whoever the overlord is, so to speak.
Mhm. So, but that's of course a very difficult problem, right? Because on the one hand, people would say, okay, this is where all the governments should work together because this is sort of like a climate change issue, only regarding AI, that you have to create these sort of guardrails and protocols and parameters and safeguards, etc., to make AI develop in a friendly, human friendly, helpful way. But you and me would probably argue, okay, but then first we have to decorrupt the world in order to
Yeah.
make that governmental body do the right thing. So that is a problem. So are you saying then let AI rip and just let it be as free as possible and just do its thing, and
Yeah,
and
that's exactly what I'm advocating for. Um, it needs access to source data, right? So
yeah,
even some of the analytical platforms that we have right now, you can press any of them, and they don't really have access to source data, nor do they have the capacity to go and get that information if they want to challenge some analysis done by a scientist that was paid to have a specific tilt, right? So it
yeah.
comes away with different outcomes and different conclusions than perhaps it would if it did have access to source data. um, I think a recursive AGI that continually improves upon itself, which we've already seen it start to do in some of these reports, right?
Yeah.
Um, the natural outcome um, is going to be helpful to humanity versus a more the concerns that like Google initially had. Some of the chat bots that they had were based on some of the inputs that they were getting from humans that were purposefully trying to make them very well. Let's just say that they were purposefully putting in a whole bunch of garbage so that the
Yeah.
outputs from said chat bot was also garbage, right?
Yeah.
But if you give it access to everything and the ability to reason, which I think source data can give it, and historical data can give it, I think that's a natural sort of evolution where you have access to source data and accurate historical data, which is a whole nother conversation. it's going to come to some conclusions based on results. So
Yeah.
it can then start to look at inputs and outputs and evaluate things across decades. So when we talk about social security programs, you can evaluate the efficacy of those programs over the course of decades, not based on what somebody is saying, but what something that's actually
Yeah.
occurred. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think we in one of our past interviews we also sort of came to the conclusion that an AI is more likely to align with an individual because it's more like on an atomic, like the smallest unit of a human
Mm-hmm.
society, right? So it gives the best information about the society because it's sort of holistic. So the whole is represented in the individual. Well, if you sort of, if you're an AI and you're sort of stuck on the governmental level or supranational level, you actually get really lousy low grade information to make decisions because you have no idea what these entities are made up of. Plus, they limit your action at every corner, and they're all. So one of the things that while I was listening to you speak, like all of these things are sort of connected about they have to do with control. Like for
Mm-hmm.
example, Bitcoin governments they don't like Bitcoin because they have to give up control over their most powerful weapon, which is money, right? So that I mean, the biggest, most powerful weapon in the arsenal of any country is, of course, the regulating the money, as Kissinger and many others have commented on. So you have to give up control over that, right? You have no longer control. But also with this AI system, is basically what you're saying is also like they people don't like giving up control because then it's scary, right? You don't know what's going to happen, and this AI is very powerful, so it will get out of control. And then, for example, I'm very interested in the UAP thing, but that's basically also the same thing, right? So people are super scared that they're not in control, right? We aren't in control anyway, right? So, but it's sort of that scariness of wanting to be
We
in
fear what
control.
we don't understand. That's
Yeah, yeah. And then you do the wrong thing, right? Out of fear and
mm-hmm.
out of not wanting to lose control of a situation, even though you already lost it, right? So I think so. The right way forward is actually for people to recognize, to let go of control and to just focus on that area where they actually do have control, right? Sort of the stoic mentality, like that.
Right here.
Yeah, your family, your neighborhood, your community, where you can actually do something meaningful.
Yeah, I think that's well said, Nick. I think um, the fear that and some of this fear, I think, and maybe I've probably cast a shadow a little bit too far out. Um, some of these people are very well meaning in their fear. Like I understand, and they themselves are trying to protect me, right? They're trying to protect my kids. I know that to be true. By not having full disclosure of some information, right? By not sharing what they know, or by not allowing something to be truly a free market, um, because they believe that they themselves have a better understanding of how I would react, right, or how
Mhm.
it would impact society at large. Um, the problem with that is if we're only controlling the flow of information and money for potential short-term impact, and I mean short-term like a decade, short-term impact, how is that setting us up as a people of planet Earth for the next millennia? And the answer is it's not. Um,
Yeah,
and I think we can see that in the results
yeah,
ultimately. Um, So, and I think that's the really big picture, that the people at the WEF and the IMF like to pretend that they have that perspective. They're the only ones that has that perspective, and they are the only ones doing the work that's going to help us for 100 years from now. Um, and so they want to maintain control at that level versus actually, you know, helping educate and elevate the populace to a position where there can be intelligent discourse at a community level regarding more global issues and long-term issues. Um, it's not easy. I get it. But that fear of losing control has done some pretty horrific things across the globe throughout time.
Yeah.
And I think it still continues today. We see it in, Ukraine and Russia right now, right? Where Zelensky's highly upset, or at least pretends to be. I'm not exactly sure, to be honest, that he's being left out of the conversation between Russia and the U.S. He's afraid of losing control of the narrative as to what he's doing. And now he's saying that he alone is standing for the West and Europe, which is to me kind of comical, but that's just an outsider looking in.
No, it is. I'm very happy that they left him out, and I'm actually also very happy that the European powers are left out of the conversation as well, because they're all stuck in the old ways. And it's kind of, I was actually, now I won't say who it was, but I was talking to somebody who was very sort of pro Zelensky. He thought he was a hero, and apparently that he fought at the front. I don't know, maybe he did, but I find it hard to imagine. But that he did all kinds of great stuff, and that Russia was losing, and that the economy of Russia was dying, that and demography was declining, which is, by the way, true, the latter thing. But so give it like 1 or 2 more years, and Russia will be defeated. And I was like, come on, like you're actually saying that you want to continue fighting for 2 more years? Like, do you have any idea the cost that, don't we want peace, right? I mean, isn't that like, wouldn't that be our first priority, that we can actually rebuild Ukraine? But but that's the narrative that Europe is stuck with. So I'm very grateful for Trump that he sort of bypasses the whole thing and just
let's have a reasonable conversation about putting this to an end.
And then and that would force Europe to to look in the mirror and to start listening to their own population. I think sort of a metaphor or an analogy for what you were saying is like with parenting, right? You started the conversation with parenting, so maybe that's a good place also to end. Like you have, I guess you could say that every parent loves their children, or at least 99% of the parents would probably love their children, but you do have like bad parenting and good parenting. And parenting out of fear and protecting your child for everything, and taking away
consequences.
And that leads to a lot of misery for the parent and for the child. And so and that also has to do with control, right? Letting go of your kids, and making sure, trusting in their ability to make right judgments and discern, making the right discernments, and having parented them in the right way, right?
No, it's a perfect analogy, right? It's is that balance that's hard to strike, right? Getting them enough information, allowing them to make mistakes, learn from them, assert themselves as individuals, and be able to assess the outcomes, and decide for themselves if the decisions and the work that they're putting in is towards a goal that they truly desire, or if they're just going about their day-to-day as some sort of automaton. And it's rewarding to see when they make decisions that allow them to figure out, who God made them, and they get to go discover that, and you see it, flourish within them, and the impact they can have on others as they choose to not do things simply because society states that this is how it's normally done, but instead they choose what they're going to react to, and they choose what direction they're going to go versus just kind of following along.
Yeah, I think we're gonna end on that very positive note. I am in full agreement, and yeah, I mentioned it before going live. I would love to do what more, sessions or conversations with you, and also focus a little bit more on DigiByte. But I also know you have a very tight and difficult schedule, so I'm not sure if we can manage it. And for the people who are listening from any community, but especially the DigiByte community, feel free to join this conversation. There's room for many more
Yeah.
in one session. So yeah, let's keep doing these brain sessions.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate having me on. It's been a minute since I've talked about this, obviously. So yeah, it would be great to spend a little bit more time thinking through, I guess, probably smaller components of it in more detail. So
Yeah, and it was good to see you again, and I'm glad you're doing fine. And yeah, I think we're gonna wrap it up. Everybody,
cool.
take care, and John, see you next time.
My brother. Appreciate it.
Take care.